What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Warden Healer. So Warden Healer in Murkmire has gotten a bit of a boost compared to when it was pre-Murkmire, and that's mainly because of a few changes that were made by Zos, not necessarily concerning Warden Healers specifically, but more about skills that support roles used in generals. If we want to talk very specifically, it's the changes to Warhorn that they made. So Warhorn no longer provides minor toughness when used. And so that means the only source of minor toughness now comes from Wardens and their green balance passive maturation. So a lot of endgame groups now, if you want to maintain that minor toughness, you'll need to bring either a Warden Healer or Warden off tank running Blood Altar. Naturally speaking, a lot of groups are taking Warden Healers rather than Warden off tanks for that additional minor toughness, just because it just fits better with the whole idea that in order to proc minor toughness you have to heal. So a lot of groups are going Templar Healer, Warden Healer now if they want to maintain that minor toughness. So Warden Healers definitely got a nice boost in terms of group utility. They were always pretty decent when compared to Templars. Those two have always kind of been neck and neck when it comes to healing strength and healing utility. But now the Wardens do have a little bit extra that they can provide that the Templars cannot. So I do highly recommend those of you guys who are running endgame content to highly consider taking a Warden Healer instead of going with your typical 2 Templar Healers if you want the additional minor toughness. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, CPs, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. As a support role, you will need to be very flexible with the sets that you wear, so I will be going over all the different sets that you might be asked to wear depending on the content and depending on what your other healer is wearing if you're running vet trials. And then because healers don't really have a parse, I'll be going over my personal philosophy behind healing, what I try to prioritize, what I look for when I try out new healers for raid teams and things like that. So that'll be towards the end of the video in place of a 6-man dummy parse. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started first with our gear. So with the changes in Somerset, with staves now counting as 2 pieces when it comes to set effects, that does allow healers to wear a monster helm set. So our monster helm set of choice is going to be Bogdan. This is a set that you can get from, I believe it is Elden Hollow 2. So pretty nice set to have here. Whenever you heal a friendly target, you have a 5% chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters of the totem for 3970 health every second. So even though it's a very small percentage chance to proc, it's 5%, every target that you heal has a chance to proc this effect. So if you think about it, if you are using healing springs or you toss out an orbs, every person that's getting healed by your orbs or your springs has a chance to have that totem proc. So you can actually get pretty decent uptime on Bogdan, even though it's only a 5% chance to proc. So a lot of healers are wearing Bogdan. This is a very while this is not necessarily the easiest set to obtain, it is a base game set, so it's pretty much available to any healer in the game. The second monster helm set that you will see healers running most often is going to be Earthgore. So Earthgore does come from Vet Bloodroot Forge, so you will need to have access to Horns that are Reach DLC in order to get this. When you heal a friendly target that is under 50% health, you conjure a cool of quenching blood underneath them, which soaks up an enemy placed effect instantly and heals all friendly targets in the area for, in this case, 34 to 100 health every 6 seconds. And this effect can occur once every 3 to 5 seconds. So this is a very nice burst heal. So 34, in this case 34,200 health over 6 seconds works out to be a little over 5,000 health every second, about 6,000 health or so. So pretty strong in terms of heal. Obviously it can't crit because it is a proc, but it's a pretty strong burst heal to have. The only downside of running Earthgore is that it does only occur every 35 seconds. So you might not proc when you need it to, and it might not proc when you want it to, just because it procs under anybody under 50% health. There's no like X% chance, it automatically procs if it is up. So it might not proc at the most opportune of times, but when it does proc, it's a very nice burst heal that lets you be a little bit more aggressive, allows your DPS to be a little bit more aggressive that way. And finally, one other set that I do want to mention that you might run, not necessarily for things like mini trials, so not necessarily Asylum or Cloud Rest, but for trials where you might have I'm going to be bringing Stam DPS. It's going to be Sentinel of Rukugams. So this comes from Vet Darkshade Caverns 2. Very easy dungeon to complete, so it's a very easy set to pick up. When you heal a friendly target, you have a 10% chance to summon a Dormer Spider that heals for 1195 health and restores 524 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters of the spider every 1 second for 8 seconds. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. So this is a much smaller heal compared to something like Earthgore or Bogdan. It's about a quarter as strong, or 25% as strong as Bogdan. Has twice the amount of chance to proc, and again, a lot like Bogdan, everybody you heal has a chance to proc this, so 6 people, 6 different independent chances to proc Sentinel of Rukugams. Plus, it also restores stamina, so if you have a lot of stamina DPS, and a lot of trials guilds are pushing more stamina DPS just because the DPS for stam is considerably higher than magic DPS under raid conditions, this really helps out your stamina sustain. Now, generally speaking, stamina won't necessarily need the additional sustain. If this happens to proc on your tank, obviously the additional stamina is great for their resource pool when if they need additional stamina to block and things like that. So Sentinel is a pretty nice set to help keep your stamina DPS all topped off on their resources, and it does also help your magic DPS as well, especially in fights where they might need to dodge roll or block or break free very often. Just helps restore their stamina pools up, so that way if they do need to dodge roll again very quickly, they don't need to wait a very long time for their stamina to regen. So those are the 3 primary monster helm set that you will see. There are a few others like Lord Wardens and Bloodspawn that you might see being used, but those are generally going to be a little bit rare to find and very situational. So Bloodspawn, when you take damage, you have a chance to generate ultimate and increase your resistances. So this is more for if you want to generate as many Warhorns as you can. Obviously, it is dependent on you taking damage, so there is a little bit of a risk involved in using this. So you'll see this more often for score pushing guilds. They want to get those Warhorns out to get that major force uptime as high as possible. So you might see healers run Bloodspawn there. And then Lord Warden, not very often on a healer. I don't really see it being used all too often, but it is something that's been kind of floated around here and there that I've seen on a few discords. When you take damage, you basically have a chance to summon a Shadow Orb for 10 seconds that increases physical and spell resistance of you and everybody within 8 meters of you by 3870. And this is just nice because typically speaking, the healers will be stacked somewhere among the DPS, and this just helps out survivability. Again, I have not seen this used at all in any of the guilds that I have run with or any groups that I have run with, but I know this is an idea that's kind of been floated around. It's just never really been acted upon. So in terms of healing 5-piece sets, you can split them up into basically 2 different types of sets. You have a body set, which is basically active all the time, so you only wear it on your body or jewelry. And then you have what's called a back bar set or a front bar set. Basically, this set is only active on one of your bars. So generally speaking, your body sets are going to be those sets with 5-piece bonuses that you always want to have active at all times, and I'll be going over those sets specifically. And then your back bar sets are typically going to be more proc sets, basically sets that you can use and activate on your back bar, swap to your front bar for a few seconds to heal or do whatever you need to do on your front bar, and then you can swap back to your back bar and proc it again. So basically, front bar or back bar sets, their effects carry over even though they don't have the 5-piece set active on the off bar. So the first set I want to talk about is going to be Olorime's. Olorime's is by far the strongest set in terms of group utility that a healer can provide. This does come from Cloud Rest, so you will need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to use this set. I have the perfected version here. You can go with the imperfect version. So the perfect version adds that max magicka on the 5-piece. The imperfect version does not have this. Some people call Olorime's a backbar set. Some people call it a body set, and realistically, you can go with either. So I have it as the body set here. There's a bit of a stronger argument for it to be a body set as a perfected version, just because if you have it as a front bar set, when you swap to your off bar which doesn't have Olorime, then you will lose that max magicka and the magicka regen, both of which are pretty strong bonuses to have. So a lot of healers typically go with Olorime's as the body set, but I have also seen healers run this as a back bar set with very good effects. So it really depends on whether or not you're able to get perfect Olorime on your body pieces rather than just 3 body pieces and your weapons. It's kind of dependent on what sort of configuration you manage to get first, but if you can, I would probably recommend going body for the additional magicka and regen active on both bars rather than just on that one bar. Then for our body set here, I have Infallible Aether. Infallible Aether is a base game set. You can get it from any of the 3 Kraglorn trials, so pretty easy to obtain. While it does seem initially as a DPS set, the 5-piece is better suited for a healer. So your fully charged heavy attacks, well, it does say fully charged, it does not have to be fully charged, just channeling it will apply the effect. Enemies you damage with this heavy attacks are afflicted with minor vulnerability for 10 seconds, increasing damage taken by 8%. So you can see here it's a pretty nice debuff to have. This is the same debuff that shock enchants put on enemies when they proc. However, a lot of magic DPS are no longer running shock enchants. Typically it's only going to be the healers, maybe the tank, running shock enchants for that minor vulnerability / concussed uptime. So having this Infallible Aether just helps boost your minor vulnerability uptime. And damage taken buffs, or debuffs I should say, they actually add a pretty sizable amount of DPS. Definitely very noticeable if you don't have this minor vulnerability debuff up. So this is definitely a set that I would recommend, and this is a back bar set just because you can use it on your back bar, swap to your front bar for 10 seconds, and then swap back to your back bar and reapply the minor vulnerability debuff that way. Now, there are 2 different unique Resto stats that you can use. You don't have to run these, so if you wanted, I could replace this with an Infallible Aether Restoration Staff, and that way have my back bar set active on both bars. But by doing so, I'll be giving up the unique bonuses of this particular staff, the Master's Restoration Staff, or the Asylum Staff, which is the other alternative that you can run. So the Master's Restoration Staff comes from Dragonstar Arena. It's a base game 4-man trial in Kraglorn, so anybody can grab this Resto Staff. The initial heal of Grand Healing, or in this case Healing Springs or Illustrious Healing, restores 258 stamina to each friendly target affected, up to 6 people. So as you can imagine, very nice for giving your tank some more stamina to block with, giving your stamina DPS more stamina to DPS with, giving your Magicka more stamina to dodge roll or block with. So pretty nice buff to have, and I personally like to run Master's Restoration Staff on at least one of my healers in every trial that I happen to lead, just because that stamina return is pretty nice to have. Now, the other unique set that you could run is going to be, if I can find it, should be P. It's the Perfected Asylum Restoration Staff. So this comes from Asylum Sanctorium, so you will need access to the Clockwork City DLC in order to get this. This is the perfected version. You can go with the imperfect version. So the perfected version only comes from Vet hard mode. The imperfect version comes from pretty much any other configuration. The difference is going to be the perfected has a 30% reduction, while the imperfect has, I believe it's 27% reduction, so not that big of a difference at all. When you cast Blessing of Protection, or in this case Combat Prayer, the cost of your healing abilities are reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. This basically helps out your sustain a little bit. So what a lot of people do is use Combat Prayer and then 2 Orbs, and then that means your 2 Orbs have a 30% reduction in their cost, which is actually pretty sizable because Orbs is actually fairly expensive to actually cast. So very nice for sustain for you. So you can pick any one of these 2 staves here. So that's my personal opinion. Again, you can go with doubling up on your back bar set. So I can run an Infallible Aether Restoration Staff on the front bar. That way I have IA active on both bars. Again, you are giving up the Master's Restoration Staff or the Perfected Asylum staves unique effects that way. So you kind of have to make that trade-off and make the decision for yourself whether you want to make that sacrifice or not. Now, before we go into alternative sets, I do want to mention here traits and enchants. So I personally like to have Infused on my large with Prismatic enchants, so that just gives me some additional max health, additional max stamina, which is always nice to have for survivability as well as dodge rolling and blocking with that stamina. For our small pieces, we have Divines with max Magicka enchants, pretty self-explanatory. We just want stronger Mundus Stones as well as higher max Magicka pools. For jewelry, you have a few options here. So in terms of enchants, there's really 2 primary enchants that you're going to be seeing: Magicka regen and spell damage. Magicka regen, obviously, for the additional regen, and spell damage for additional healing power. So me personally, I like to get as close as I can to 2k Magicka regen and 2k spell damage, as close as I can, unbuffed. Obviously, people play healers a little bit differently. This is my personal philosophy when it comes to healing. Go for a balanced approach. Don't overstack regen, because if you're always sitting at 90% max Magicka, then you might be sacrificing a little bit in spell damage. You might be eating an opportunity cost. So if you're able to sustain with, let's say, 2500 fully buffed, then stick with that. Don't have to go any above that, and you can instead pad your spell damage to get a little bit more healing power out of your spells that way. So that's kind of my personal approach. Other people like to just go, no, I'm going to go spec full regen, so that way I can just spam orbs all I want. There's no necessarily wrong answer. This is just kind of how you heal personally. And then in terms of traits for jewelry, Arcane or Infused are the two most common ones that I've seen. Infused for the additional enchant power, and then Arcane for the additional resources you get from Max Magicka. I have seen Triune being used as well, much for the same reason as you would go with a Prismatic enchant on your large pieces. Extra health, extra stamina is always nice to have there. Then for our weapons, we're going double Infused. There is an argument for decisive, for basically better Warhorn uptime. You get your Warhorn up faster, higher Major Force uptime, better DPS. So that's another option there. A lot of healers will go with Infused though for the additional enchant strength. And just like with your jewelry, you do have a few options when it comes to enchants. I like to go weakening weapon damage. Weapon damage obviously for the additional spell power buff, and then weakening to help reduce the damage that's incoming to the group. Both very strong enchants to have here. Other enchant options you could be asked to run, and this is going to depend on your group and again your personal healing style. Crusher, if for example maybe your tanks are going to be running weakening instead, because tanks generally will have better uptime on their enchants than you will, especially if you're not double barring weakening or anything like that. So you might be running Crusher, and you can also run Absorb Magicka if you want the additional sustain from that glyph there. So generally speaking though, you will typically see weapon damage enchant being run on one of your bars just for the additional healing strength, and then this weakening enchant is sometimes swapped out for something like Absorb Magicka, or again I usually see weakening being run here because your tanks are typically running Crusher for that debuff instead. But you might run Crusher, again it depends on your group. For a while healers in Mayflower were actually running Crusher for, I believe when we were progressing Asylum hard mode, we actually had our healers running Crusher rather than the tanks, just because it was easier for tanks to apply weakening than healers to apply weakening. So that was kind of the rationale behind that. Again, it's kind of a very niche case, but it is something you might want to consider doing as well. Going over to our character sheet, we are a Breton. Bretons are one of the better races when it comes to healing. Another good race option is going to be Argonians. So the difference between them is basically what you want to shoot for. So Bretons get 10% max magicka, 3% cost reduction. So pretty nice for the additional sustain bonus. They also get 3960 additional spell resistance, so that helps out their survivability. And as a healer, additional survivability is always a good thing. Argonians, on the other hand, have 9% max health, 3% max magicka, 5% healing done. So they have a little bit more healing strength, but they give up a little bit of regen / sustainability because they have lower magicka pools and they don't have that cost reduction that Bretons have. But they do have a potion passive. Whenever they drink a potion, they restore around 4,000 magicka health and stamina. So that potion passive really helps out their sustain in another way. And if you aren't running potion cooldown glyphs, this ends up being an additional effective 100 additional regen for magicka's health and stamina, approximately. So that's kind of how that all translates into regen that way. So those two races are typically going to be the strongest races for healing. You could go with any of the other magically inclined races though. So dark elves or high elves, those are all perfectly fine, but those races are generally speaking more geared towards DPS. So if you want to turn your healer into a DPS at some point, then by all means you can go with a dark elf or a high elf. But if you're just going for pure healer, then Breton or Argonians are going to be your best choices. For attributes, because we are running 3 prismatic enchants, we are able to run Clockwork Citrus Fillet or which one is Potent Brew, and that allows us to put all of our points into magicka because we are able to hit 18k health or so with the food and our prismatic enchants. Now that being said, if you are not running prismatic enchants, if instead you're running something like max magicka enchants, you will not be able to run this food and have 64 points into magicka. At this point you will need to put a couple of points from magicka into health. So generally speaking, the max health that you want to shoot for before you have your Evan buff is going to be roughly 17 to 18k. Now a Warden healer will always have minor toughness up no matter what. So you do have that little additional padding there. So that's why it's going to be a little bit lower than it would be for Templars, just because you always will have minor toughness active. So that's kind of the health threshold you want to shoot for. Once you hit that health threshold, at that point you can basically invest into magicka then. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb, 17 to 18k health, and then the rest can go into magicka that way. For our Mundus Stone, I like to go with Atronach for the additional Magicka regen. Other people like to go with the Ritual for the additional healing strength. So because I'm going with the Atronach, this allows me to spec a little bit more heavily into spell damage because I can make up that regen through the Atronach. Conversely, if I were to use the Ritual, then I can invest a little bit more into regen because now the Ritual will help make up for my lower spell damage. So that's a little bit basically a flip-flop there. So you could also run the Atronach and spec into regen, and run the Ritual and spec into spell damage. It's kind of up to you. So those are the two main Mundus Stones that you will see healers running. Don't want to use purple food. So you can actually run purple food if you would like. So you can see here the regen is actually pretty decent with purple food. So this is basically max resources, max Magicka health and stamina. As you can see here, we're pretty cozy with Magicka and Magicka regen here. Not quite at 2,000, but pretty nice. The additional stamina you get from running purple food is actually really useful for trials where you might need to break free, so like Hoff for instance. However, more usually instead you'll be running something like Clockwork Citrus Fillet here, or Witchmother's Potent Brew. So with Clockwork Citrus Fillet, obviously we get a lot better regen. Our regen jumps up to almost 2,300. We do lose a little bit of health, and we do lose a little bit of Magicka, and obviously we lose the stamina. But we do get some additional regen this way here, so it's kind of up to you. A lot of healers would typically just run Clockwork Citrus Fillet or Witchmother's Potent Brew, or even Orzgar's Red Frothgar, which is 5,000 max health and 457 Magicka regen. So basically you're giving up that max Magicka for more health and more regen that way. So those are the main foods that you will see healers run. Just pick whichever one works out best for you. So I like to stick with Clockwork Citrus Fillet or Witchmothers, but again, that's kind of dependent on having infused prismatic enchants, and if you're an Argonian, that additional health there will also help offset the loss of max health that way. Now going over our skills, you do have a few flex spots here as a healer, and we'll be going over kind of your alternatives for those flex spots when we're done here. So on your front bar, this is the Resto staff bar. Healing Springs, Combat Prayer, Blue Betty, Overflowing Altar, Energy Orb, and Enchanted Forest. Then for our back bar, this is the Destruction Staff bar. We have Enchanted Growth, Blockade of Storms, Budding Seeds, Leeching Vines, Elemental Drain, and Aggressive Warhorn. Now in terms of flex spots here, Leeching Vines is going to be a flex spot. You don't necessarily have to run Leeching Vines here because the Minor Lifesteal is also applied by Overflowing Altar as well. And your second flex spot is arguably, and again, some people disagree with me on this, is going to be Enchanted Growth. It really depends on whether or not you need additional regen from Minor Intellect, Minor Endurance, your DPS specifically. This is one of the most reliable sources of those minor buffs, which are obviously pretty nice to have. So a lot of people don't consider this a flex spot, but you can swap this out if you absolutely need to. So in terms of additional abilities you can use here instead of Leeching Vines, the other thing too I want to mention is that you can push Overflowing Altar to the back bar if you would like. Again, it's up to you if you want to do that. Then Aggressive Warhorn for our ultimate here. So a couple of other alternatives here. You can go with Expansive Frost Cloak. The Warden heal that I typically run with will usually have Expansive Frost Cloak for the Major Ward and Major Resolve. This is granted to you and I believe up to 5 allies around you within 28 meters, so this is really nice in terms of increasing group survivability. Not all classes in the game have access to Major Ward and Major Resolve, so for instance, Templars will have it because through their channel focus, but something like a Magicka DK or a Magicka Nightblade will not necessarily have Major Ward and Major Resolve in their tool set. So this just helps provide some additional survivability. Cermak Shield is another option that you might want to consider running. This is obviously only going to be used if you are fighting something that might hit you with a projectile. This is one of the only sources for major heroism. So this just really boosts your ultimate gain. So 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds, otherwise known as 2 ultimate per second. So this just helps getting your Warhorn out much faster, which gives you higher major force uptime for increased DPS. But again, this is limited to fights where you know you'll be hit by projectiles this way. If you want to help out your tanks with chaining things in, this is more for like 4-man content, less so for dungeon, for trials and things like that. You can run Frozen Device or the other morph if you would like. A Green Lotus is one option that you might want to consider running. This just gives an additional heal to your light and heavy attacks. It's not, or I guess you don't want to run Green Lotus, you want to run the other morph, Lotus Blossom, for the Major Prophecy. But overall, this is a pretty weak heal. You can see here 1557 health. This is not that much on a light attack. Even though you should be weaving between all of your skills, it's ultimately not going to be that big of a heal compared to something like Budding Seeds or Healing Springs. Ritual Ring of Preservation is another ability that you might run. This is for the minor protection within 5 meters. This is more for instances where your group's going to be stacked and you need the additional damage mitigation. Best example of this I can give is going to be Assembly General and the Hall's Fabrication. Otherwise, this is a very rare ability that you will have to run here. Bone Surge is another ability that you might be asked to run. This is again going to be situational, so this provides you a 30% shield, and when somebody activates synergy, they give a 50% damage shield as well as major vitality. So Bone Surge is more for the vitality, less so for the shield, because that major vitality increases healing received by 30%, which is very, very sizable. So Cloud Rest, for progression style guilds, a lot of healers are running a Bone Surge for the additional major vitality to help heal through things like Dark Drain and other dots that might be applied to the group that way. And then Efficient Purge, if you need to cleanse debuffs. There are obviously going to be fights where you need to cleanse debuffs, in which case you'll be running Purge instead of one of these abilities here. So definitely a skill you want to pick up and learn here. So in terms of abilities that you will never ever want to swap out, Healing Springs, Comet Prayer, Blue Betty, and Energy Orbs. I've actually gotten to the point where I don't really use Healing Springs very often, but you still want to have it on your bar because Healing Springs is the best way to basically heal through large amounts of continuous damage. So for example, Serpent Poison Phase. So while Orbs is becoming my primary source of healing, you still want to have Springs on bar just in case you need to spam a heal or something like that. So these 4 definitely not swappable at all. Overflowing Altar arguably can be a flex spot. If you have another support role running Altar, then you don't need to run this yourself. Altars do not stack. Enchanted Growth I've already mentioned is kind of an optional thing for me, but it is mandatory for others. Blockade is a mandatory for the off balance. Budding Seeds mandatory for that additional synergy as well as a burst heal. This is a flex. Elemental Drain. This is arguably a flex spot. If you're up against one boss and your other healers already had applying Ellie Drain, then you won't necessarily need to run Ellie Drain either, because again, Ellie Drain doesn't stack, but it is nice to have. So this is technically a flex spot. You don't need to have Ellie Drain if there's already another healer running Ellie Drain, but just to be safe, you should be running this anyways, because you never know if that other healer dies or forgets to apply it at some point. And obviously, Warhorn, not really a flex spot at all. Now going over our champion points, the CP cap is 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation colors. Starting off with our green CPs, 75 Arcanus, 75 Tenacity, gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes, however you really like. So you can even push Tenacity and Arcanus up to 100 if you would like, and put those 70 points elsewhere. I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, 40 Warlord. Now for blue CPs, this particular setup is assuming that this tune is strictly all healing. So you're only healing ever on this tune. Naturally speaking, if you are going to be running this tune as a DPS as well on the side, you can obviously just chop, throw up the 3k gold to respec every time. So I would recommend doing that and just swapping CP around. 3k gold is actually pretty easy to get in this game. So 75 Blessed, 81 Elfborn, 49 Ellie Expert, 25 Spell Erosion, and then 40 into Thaumaturge. A lot of the blue CPs here are centered around DPS, so you don't really need to invest that many points. If you really want to, you can even put 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn to truly fully maximize your healing capabilities, but it's kind of up to you. It's always nice to have a little bit of additional DPS through penetration and all these passives as a healer. Then for our red CPs, this is a balanced approach, so this is going to give you very good mitigation across every single piece of content that you might ever run. But if you want to maximize the mitigation in any single piece of content, then you will need to redistribute these points accordingly. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, 64 into Hardy, and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much all of our build information, so let's go over kind of my personal healing philosophy, basically how I approach healing in endgame content. So for me, heals per second, HPS basically, is not an accurate measure of how good you are as a healer. For me, it's more about how many resources I've been putting out, it's basically how many orbs are out at any given point in time, or what's the average number of orbs I'm putting out per second, and buff uptimes. So what are my Comet Prayer uptimes? What does that Minor Berserk uptime from Comet Prayer look like? those are more important to me than the true heals per second. The kind of idea behind, my personal idea behind healing is heal your DPS enough so they don't die. Beyond that, you are buffing, and the advantage is a lot of the buffing things that you're giving out also act as heals. So Comet Prayer heals, Orbs heal, so naturally those two kind of go hand in hand. So the better my buff uptimes are, the more I'm healing my group. So that's my personal approach to healing. Now obviously you can kind of take that as you will, you can make a different approach if you would like, but generally speaking, if you are running endgame content, vet trials, vet DLC dungeons, vet arenas, buff up times are generally going to be a little bit more important than pure healing ability, just because better buffs means better DPS, means faster fights, which means faster scores, which means less time for screw ups, which means less deaths overall. So in that instance, buffs do correlate to reducing deaths. So they do go hand in hand, healing and buff up times. So for me, the most important things to maintain are obviously going to be Comet Prayer and Orbs. Orbs for the resource return, and then Comet Prayer for the Mad Berserk uptime. For my personal buffs, want to keep Blue Betty up. This is very nice to have for the sustain. Plus, if you're in a fight with debuffs, if you're not running Purge, or if you already have enough Purges and somebody's like, oh, you don't need to run Purge, then running your Blue Betty also cleanses one random debuff off you. So one example that I usually sometimes bring out is if I ever Warden heal Asylum during, I actually don't typically run Purge on a Warden healer because what's it called? Trial by Fire is typically survivable without Purge. It is nice to be able to purge it, but you don't have to do it. But Blue Betty will instantly purge that dot off me, so I don't have to worry about running Purge at all. I can just put my Blue Betty up, it's a free cast, and I get a free 1 debuff cleanse. So that's really nice to have here. Now, if you are the one responsible for maintaining Blood Altar, then make sure you have Blood Altar up. This procs minor lifesteal, which is just an additional heal of 600 additional healing per second, so really nice to have. Plus it also does count for your maturation buff, so you will get minor toughness that way. So the maturation buff is on the green balance, so this is off of any heal, and it does count minor lifesteal. So having Blood Altar on a Warden is a great way to basically ensure that you will have that minor toughness active pretty much at all times. Now on your back bar, if you are responsible for maintaining Ellie Drain, make sure you're maintaining that. Ellie Drain, let's see, Ellie Drain lasts for 24 seconds, so every 24 seconds you should be reapplying that if you're responsible for that. Beyond that, make sure to have Blockade down as often as you can for the off balance uptime. Off balance is really nice to have for Stam, because Stam will always have that CP passive, Exploiter passive for the additional damage against off balance enemies. So the higher your off balance uptime, the more DPS your Stam DPS will be able to pull. Plus, if you're able to time it correctly, you can get more resources back from your heavy attacks, so that just helps out sustain for Stam and Magic DPS collectively. Now, one thing that I do like to have up on the tank at all times, this is specifically for the tank, is going to be Budding Seeds. So you can't hit the button again before the 6 seconds are up to instantly have a instant heal. So this is kind of like an AoE Breath of Life. A little bit slower, obviously, because you got to hit the button twice, but it is a nice AoE burst heal here. However, I just prefer to just leave it on the tank, and because there's a synergy attached to it, I just let the tank decide when they want to have the synergy. So they can hit the synergy, get it, or if they choose not to use the synergy, they still have a heal after 6 seconds. So I don't need to hit it. If I see the tank go down, health go down, then obviously I can hit it prematurely if I would like to, but I don't necessarily need to do it. And a lot of tanks are running Alkosh in vet trials, so having that additional synergy on them and choosing when to activate it for over that 6 second period is very helpful for increasing Alkosh uptime. So that's how I like to use Budding Seeds personally. And then obviously once your Warhorn's up, you can run Warhorn. If you're in a high damage situation and you're going to want to be running Enchanted Forest instead of Warhorn, that's going to be dependent on what your raid lead wants and what you personally feel is going to be more important in that scenario. It's very hard for me to describe how to heal on a Warden healer without actually showing you how to heal on a Warden healer. So take a look through my streams archives. I'm sure I have a video somewhere where I was healing on a Warden, so you guys can get an idea of what my healing technique and my healing style looks like in various situations. And that's pretty much it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments about healing or this build in general, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.